Well, welcome to Lighting the Candle, a world that works. And I am Bill Correll, still and again. And I'm here with my longtime friend and intellectual partner with regard to having conversations for empowerment and really kind of taking a look at the world, Ken Caputo. Today is going to be a very interesting day. I'm deciding that right now as I am speaking. And I feel a challenge out in the world, having talked to a few people, studied some things. And I'm kind of wondering where we are right now in the life cycle of cultures. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So if you and I were to step back and use our knowledge and our study and all of those sorts of things that come to play when we're talking about the definition of words, what if we kind of rose up to 30,000 feet and took a look at what's going on in the world right now, more or less from a system standpoint? You know how you and I can separate ourselves from the conversation about what's happening and look for what's
Mhm.
happening, right? So that's what I'm thinking. And I'm hoping that this will resonate with some folks out there that are feeling a little uh, trapped or stuck, because there are some things in terms of conversations that don't make an awful lot of sense until you look for how they make sense for the people that are having those conversations. And I really feel, Ken, that you and I are of the same makeup in terms of being able to objectively see what the motivations are, understand them clearly without judgment or without taking away any power from any side. And I mean, to kind of kick the whole thing off, if we look throughout history, and let's just take what happens when people go to war. And if you're ever not comfortable with this conversation, either as a listener or a participant, all you folks at home, I want you to stick with us until we're done. We will never leave you hanging in a state of being disempowered. And you may hear one or two things that might seem like we're headed that direction. I'm laying that out there as a caveat in advance, and our intention will be everyone's in good shape when we say goodbye. Make sense? Okay.
Yep.
So let's take a look at, for example, one of the most famous conflicts in the history of the world, the Civil War. And I don't care what the conversations were, but can you picture anybody in the world being willing to get up from their dinner table and go put on a uniform, either gray or blue, and being willing to shoot at and be shot at by their brothers from the same dinner table? Would this be an example of somebody who was clearly in the wrong on either side? Or would this be a very good example of what human beings do when they very strongly believe in particular things? So if we look at how cultures operate and the systems that get created out of a structured set of beliefs that are both bought and sold on a daily basis by whomever, to a point where folks are willing to take action and are willing to lose their lives and take lives over it. I wanted to put it in this framework right now because all conflict comes from, in my opinion, it comes from a lack of understanding and a lack of willingness to understand. With that said, I can think of times in my lifetime, especially in the 1990s, when I thought we were making some progress in a lot of different areas in terms of people being socially conscious of each other, being socially adept, being willing to take things back, if there was some damage done in their conversations, and being willing to listen to explanations. If you want to think about the Canfields, and Coveys, and all of the folks that were telling us how you get along with other people is you develop these very powerful habits. And those habits come from empathy. They come from a willingness to not only learn and be curious, but an intense desire to have something work exponentially compared to winning and losing and compromising. Make sense?
Mhm.
So I think we can spend a little bit more time, kind of setting the table here. And we've got the whole notion of old thought and new thought. And I'm going to define that for the purposes of of buying, you buying into what I'm saying so we can talk about these two definitions, is old thought would have been what we would have known as empiricism. It would have been, and not like an empire, but like all knowledge is built on the knowledge that came before. So that how you build on a thought, how you actually get to the point where you are inventing, is that you stand on the shoulders of the work that's been done by people before you. That takes us into the mid 1800s, when lots of people were writing about new things, the unseen and the feelings side of things, and all of the psychological work that went on, with all the different schools of learning, and then all the conversations having to do with what is going on in the universe, and what is energy, and what are all of these things in relation to you and me, with regard to all of us and all of it. So that distinguishes the two. We love going back and quoting Marcus Aurelius, or we love going back and quoting Caesar. We love going back and quoting people from the 14, 15, and 1600s. And then now we have the New Thought, which also gave us social order distinctions. In the mid 1800s was when guys like, actually, the great philosophers, Locke, Rousseau, and in his time, Karl Marx was a very smart man, and Karl Marx put his mind to a problem that he perceived that was overtaking all of the systems, the country systems that had monarchs. And so what he was able to do was to simplify all of that speaking and teaching. So now, if we take a moment, and I'm going to take a breath here, Ken, but I wanted to have this preamble to sort of set up what are the things that you and I retreat to in order to make some sense out of what doesn't seem to make sense in this world at the moment. Where do we go?
I usually go to mental alchemy. and I guess, I mean, if you're coming from a place of, for a lot of people, they're coming from a place of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And, but then someone else may look at that and say, well, it is broken, or it's going to break.
Right.
And I'm telling you, it does need to be fixed. And they're like, doesn't look broke to me, not hurting me at all. So I mean, the Civil War, if you relied on unpaid labor, as slaves for your economic model, that's not broken to you. So, and if that's what you've learned generationally, you don't see a problem. So now someone else is coming along and they're making a problem for you that you don't feel is a problem. So there's like this essential disagreement, and especially if you have a shorter term, or your center of gravity is more around like a me and mine, it's you get yours, I'm going to get mine. I had someone in business who that was their thing. It's look, I made mine. I did all the hard work. I made the sacrifices. You go get yours. But the problem was we were supposed to be in a partnership, and them continuing to make the choices they were making it so that I couldn't actually have a fair shot at getting mine. So eventually we agreed to disagree, dissolve the partnership so that I could go do my own thing, And so I guess it was sort of a civil war. We had both been working towards the same thing, but we agreed on, from my view, something was broken and needed to be fixed. And from his view, it was working great for him. So, and, so now if you have this argument, or this disagreement, where you have two people who see things through their own lens, and they just get more firm and louder about their specific lens, you're going to end up with more growing tension, and it's going to escalate to something, whatever that may be. So I always like the idea of mental alchemy, and that's, I don't have to let go of anything that I've learned, experienced, know, or believe. But at the same time, what I do need to know is, can I allow new information in, genuinely let new information in, and then allow that to mix with what I do know and see if something new comes out of it. So, but that can be very scary and intimidating, and we're seeing a lot of that right now. Don't teach my kids something I don't think they should learn. Don't, expose me to things I disagree with or don't believe in or that feel threatening to me. So there's barriers that get in the way. So, and all those things are going to lead to what we're having, increasing polarization and doubling down on what you know with people that believe like you believe. And there's not going to be any room for any new understanding. It's just, I don't think it's broke. I think it's broke. Well, I don't think it's broken. I'm not seeing it broke from my perspective. So the heck with you. I don't care what you think. Well, I don't care what you think because it's broken. It needs to be fixed, whether you want it fixed or not. And, and now they all argue and they make the empiricism fit whatever their interpretation of it is. So they read the data in a way, right?
Arguing for the sake of arguing, not arguing about what's going on, but arguing for the sake of arguing. I think it's broke. I don't think it's broke. What are you talking about? There's no definition of what broke is, right? But it's a Hatfields and the McCoys and the old, what was it? The REO Speedwagon. I've forgotten what we started fighting for. And all of this stuff is just what we do. That's the system that we built. This is how we behave. Feels unnatural if you're not, coming after each other that way in many people's choice of existence. Now, as you're saying, did you have more?
No, I think that I kind of meandered far enough down that path.
Well, the whole point is that a lot of energy goes into not communicating. It's absolutely exhausting for people to behave in that fashion. And if you kind of dive in and look under the hood a little bit as to why do people do stuff like that? Well, they make decisions about the, how conversation or any attempt to be in conversation with somebody who you consider to be a superior intellect, have better arguments. They always seem to win, Why? Because they use facts and stuff like that. That's no fair, especially when two people are having a sentiment versus factual conversation, because there's three different ways that you and I can talk to each other, and we integrate all of them. And most people know that, I don't know, up to 90% of your communication is nonverbal. And that's very powerful for some people to understand. And it also, that understanding allows people the opportunity to not feel like they have to defend every sentence that they disagree with in the middle of somebody trying to distinguish what they're talking about. So when you're in a situation where there's a lack of common understanding, and in the South, what they would tell you is, we're not going to have those people up north who have no idea how we live or what we want to do, because how many people were actually landowners in the South? And do you know how many people were actually wealthy in the South? Damn few. There were very few plantations, per population. There were a lot of non-slave folks that lived in cities and lived in small. There were a lot of white sharecroppers. There were arguably more people were working in the fields that were white in many instances than were working as slaves that were owned by the plantation owners. Not everyone had a plantation owner's wealth to be able to own slaves. So all of this coming down to, like, this was the reason the Civil War was fought, or that was the reason the Civil War was fought. I think you hit it on the head. It's broke, it ain't broke. And those were the two disagreements if you sort it all down to the bottom. And neither side was either able to understand the language or understand the feeling or understand the just the historical how it's always been. And whenever somebody comes into your house and tells you how you're going to do something, how does that make you feel? So there's all of that. And one of the neat things through history that we've always seen people do is to make declarations about other people's behavior that they have no ability or actual intent to enforce. There's no way in the free world that you can enforce, these things that we say about other countries. We call them sanctions, and we call them whatever we call them. But like, for instance, the rhetoric in the North of the abolitionists, which was to paint a picture of the Southern people that had slaves in a particular light, and the people in the South who painted abolitionists as people who just don't understand how you get things done,
Mhm.
And all of that said, when it comes right down to it, both points of view were not only sure they were right, but they were sure they were willing to die for it. Whatever
Mhm.
it actually was that they didn't understand about each other, fighting became the only method that the masses could support their way of life, the history of it, whatever. And the at the end of the day, what came afterwards was absolutely horrible for everybody involved. So that's one of the things. But there was nobody in that whole equation, if you will, who was using new thinking. There was no new thought
No,
going on. There was no, for me to shoot you is like me chopping two of my fingers off. Why would I do a thing like that? And I didn't feel like we were behaving that way with each other 25, 30 years ago, Ken. I don't know what your experience was, but it seemed like we got to be better listeners, at some point.
well, I think that, it's kind of like, I'm a football fan, and no one really talks about the ugly when they're winning. But when things start going wrong, all of a sudden the ugly that was there anyway, some people start, you know, airing that out. So, and we certainly have a lot more, a, a few people can get very, very loud now and be heard, regardless of how representative their voice is of how most people think,
Right.
and so, and we're also, I mean, something happens on the other side of the planet and we know 30 seconds after it happens. It wasn't like that 30 years ago. So, so I think there's just part of it is we're just more aware. We're in 24/7 news cycles, and, so we're just better informed, and everyone has a platform. There's no gatekeepers. Anyone can have a platform and say whatever they want. And,
Look at
you
us.
know, and yeah. And, when you're in a heightened state and you're afraid and you're frustrated and you don't know how to deal with the things that are happening, you're, like you said, you're now in an emotional state.
Yeah.
And, so things that appeal to and reinforce your emotional state are the things that you're going to pay attention to and listen to and focus on and feed your attention to. And it's just going to get worse and worse. But it's funny because so if I were, if I lived upstream from my neighbors and I invented some new way of washing my laundry and I was dumping my dirty laundry water in the stream, and then my neighbor came to me after a year and said, hey, whatever you're dumping into my stream is actually making my whole family sick, and now I'm going to have a response to that, and either I'm going to say, well, then move, screw you. It's I could say that, or I could say, I am so sorry, let me adjust what I'm doing so that I can care for my neighbor, not just for myself. Yes, this is easy and convenient for me and maybe even profitable for me in some way, but it's hurting people, and I didn't know that, and now I know that, so I'm going to stop. But what if the neighbor comes up and says, you've been conspiring to intentionally hurt me and my family. You did this and you should be punished. You should be penalized for it. You should have known better. And maybe I didn't. Maybe I had some suspicions, but I didn't really know. So, that's the type of situation where now there's tension where, you got to wonder, how often do the things that we're all screaming about right now that are second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth order consequences that involve multiple generations of people making decisions in real time for hundreds of years, I mean, was it really all malicious? I'm sure some of it was, absolutely. Some of it was selfish. Some of it was knowing there was going to be an impact. But how much of it was just accumulation of decisions and blind spots that led you to where you are? So, so now you're faced with, you've been on the receiving end of the bad decisions, and you got to decide whether or not you really want to advocate for solutions moving forwards, or focus on being angry about what got you there, or punishing people for getting there. And I'm not saying that's even wrong. I'm just saying, so now if you've inherited this system that's unfair in some way from someone else's perspective, are you being attacked? Are you being asked to respond to changes in the environment, and, like you said, engage in new thinking? Or are you just being told that it doesn't matter what you do, you're at fault, so why should you have new thinking then? So, and you go back and forth like this. So like you said, it's just, it takes a willingness for everyone to focus on, solutions and understanding where someone's coming from. You're not going to find an upstream solution if the downstream neighbor is only interested in punishment and the upstream neighbor is only interested in doing what's right for them, and they don't care about anyone else. You'll never resolve that, never. There's just they both have to agree to find some kind of middle ground. What was that thing about compromise? A good compromise is when everyone's in agreement but no one's really happy.
Yeah, where all parties are equally unhappy or
Yeah.
satisfied. Yeah.
And I'd rather I'd rather do the hard work to find the solution that's not yet known, where everybody can be happy, and maybe that doesn't exist, but it's worth working towards, and that's what I always look for in relationships. It's like, look, I want you to be happy and I don't want to be unhappy. And if we can find a way to not compromise, but to think a little deeper, get a little clearer on what we both really want here, then maybe we find the better solution that neither of us have thought of yet, if we work together by joining our two perspectives with clarity and understanding being at the forefront, and respect.
So here's what I say is missing. Any training about how to drop back from a situation and go for win-win.
Oh
There,
yeah.
it's just not even talked about any longer. We're in a situation now where the whole institutional overreach in terms of behaviors, uh, it's mind-boggling to the degree that people are being trained how to interact with each other in the workplace or in government, or education, or those sort of things. And I think what we're talking about here is, um, let's just take old thought and call it what it is. It was the art of dominating and being dominated. Okay, there were winners and losers, there were oppressed and oppressors. That's old thought. Always, you never lose unless you win, right? You never win unless you lose. But and you have to be one or the other of those. There is no in the middle. There is no tie goes to the whatever. It comes down to a philosophical thought that has to come from new age thinking from the 1800s on, where people are going, let's both agree this isn't working. Now let's start over from scratch and let's have a whole new conversation about what you really want and what I really want, and how we can bring that into being together, which is what you just said. So now, all of that going on, we have a completely different take on the world. Our culture is no longer the culture of, let's just say, our country, okay? Our country now has international ingredients to it that nobody voted on. I don't remember anybody coming to me and asking my permission to take um, a group plural and make it singular like the Brits do. I mean, like, when you think about how you and I were raised, okay, Ford has 40,000 employees worldwide. But now it's Ford have 40,000 employees worldwide. What is up with that? Well, what's up with that is a lot of things. Whenever somebody is able to convince a people that their way of speaking is inferior or needs to be upgraded or needs to subjugate itself to another way of speaking, something's going on. Okay. And I'll tell you what, whenever people tell you words you can and can't say, which remember the George Carlin deal with the 7 words you can't say on TV? I want to submit to you that is really archaic, and there's nobody alive right now who even would say, why did they ever say stuff like that? I mean, you can say any damn thing you want to on TV.
Yep.
So here we are, and we start to see that the methodology of the old thinking in terms of domination and slavery around the world for as long back as there's recorded history, on every continent, in every area, there's always been slavery. And that doesn't make slavery good or bad. It just makes it part of the scenery. And with that in mind, this is really the first country in the world that ever said, we're not doing that here anymore. Kind of interesting. And the only reason that I used this to talk about was, as we come into that old way of thinking, this was new thought in the middle of the 1800s, right? And quite frankly, we started thinking of things differently than we did in the past. And kind of the watershed thinking about the future was, we are really destined to keep fighting wars over things that don't matter in the long term forever. This is really what our destiny is right now. How about some of us start thinking in terms of win-win being like transformation, win-win like using the energy of the universe for all of our benefit? How about win-win is seeing something that needs to be done and being persuasive with a very strong factual argument, and not just having something that is based on teachings and belief systems and beating it into people until they submit and give up their old way of saying things. I will never say that Ford have 40,000 employees until I die. I promise you that. That's my language. That's the language I was taught in school. That came out of Kate Turabian, which is, the book of grammar and writing style from the 1960s and 70s. So my point is, when you look at the steps that have to go into place in order to start, the domination by a minority of people, a small group of people takes control of everyone else by doing a couple of different things. First, change the language. Change the language and enforce compliance as you go along, so that people either sound odd when they're not speaking the new language that you're teaching them, or when you teach them, they don't know what you mean. When you tell them the words and what those words mean now, or the new words that you're bringing into existence, leave them in this state of discomfort, of despair, of not being listened to. No, we don't care what you think. You will learn our language, and this is how you're going to get ahead. This is how you're going to not get bad attention, in other words. So like the whole cancel culture is all about controlling language. People are not getting canceled because they did anything. They're only getting canceled because they said something. So that's number one. Number two, control the thought. That comes after controlling the language. When you control the thought and you start to have people who are sensitized and activated, activized, all those sorts of things, where they are now no longer able to sit on the sidelines and observe or be critical in their thinking about what's going on here, and should it be this way? Does it have to be this way? Those aren't the rules. The rules are you don't get a question. Start controlling the thought. when you control the thought, now you can control the behaviors, and you can train people to react to cues and commands that don't sound like cues and commands anymore. And you can now um, energize an entire culture to do what you want them to do. And how do you do that? By continuously making an example of someone, by continuously and without regard to the consequences, doing the things that you know that those people that you're subjugating can't stand. It is so abhorrent to them. They are decent people. They would never consider in their entire life doing that to someone else. But guess what? How do you dominate people? You show them that it's possible, and it's a very real and present consequence. So those are the steps for a small group of people to take control of a large group of people without having to even talk to all of them. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Look at how the UK conquered the entire freaking world. The sun never rests on the British flag. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
It never
Yeah.
sets on the British Empire. And how was that little tiny country compared to the whole rest of the world able to do that? They used the steps that I just told you. I also used religion. So it's kind of interesting, if you step back away and look at how that happened, and also how did the Romans do it? Same way. A handful of Romans. I mean, what did they do? They went out and they converted everybody that they conquered. Now they just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And those people that couldn't understand the language, man, they had to come along. If they wanted their three squares and to not either be, beaten or killed, you play the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now we're back in this full-fledged, thanks to social media. Thanks to all of the ways that people can reach out and touch someone all over the world through this great media that you and I are having some fun kind of figuring out how it could possibly be used to empower people and make the world a better place. So I've summarized, the whole deal of domination, and it's so much better, in my opinion, for everyone to win, for there not to be any people that are feeling, upset and used and dominated. I don't know how that turns out to be good for people. I don't know how it gets to be good for the people that are doing it.
Well, it's interesting because my martial arts teacher used to tell me that the martial arts are like a hammer. It's a tool. You can build a house with it, or you can break a skull with it. It's what matters is the intention of the user. And everything you just that what you just described to me, if the intention is to, candles lighting candles, ideas worth sharing that lift everyone up, that same process will work. And it won't be a process of domination. Like, I'll give you a simple example. I've changed, all I do is change language constantly. And it's in response to the fact that people are changing, and, and our understanding, like talking about learning environments. So, like, for example, a big thing when I started teaching in the 90s was classroom management. And you'd hear that in traditional classrooms, it didn't matter. We don't use that. We made a shift to focused attention. And the idea was, instead of trying to manage behavior, we would instead create environments that made it easier for the student to behave in a way that supported the learning environment. And we explained that to everyone. So, and when someone would come in, like, through Quester's Way, I'd get a traditional educator, and and if they use that term, classroom management, I'd stop them and say, actually, we stopped using that term. We're using this instead, and this is why. And for me, if they didn't like that, they were probably not going to be very successful in my teaching environment, in the learning environment we were developing. So we'd have a conversation about that. And if they were very firm in sustaining that old language because that's what they had, and they didn't want us controlling or dominating them, right, by telling them they had to be different, then we just tell them that, this probably isn't the best place for them to work. Now, in a business, you have that ability. In a country that's a little harder, it's harder to just leave if you don't like the way things are going. But you know, the idea, I think that, you know, a few people shifting paradigms that spread to the many can be a powerful form of leadership, and it's not necessarily a bad thing or out of a sense of control. It's evolution. You know, it's, I remember Henry Ford saying, if I'd asked focus groups what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. You know, they wouldn't have wanted an automobile because they didn't know what an automobile was. They had no reference base for it. So he had to create an entire new language that would help them understand what that meant, you know, what automobile meant, you know. So it's kind of interesting. I think that, again, now you're back to intention, and you know, and the best way to at least determine that, like, I watch what politicians do. Do they talk about causes and solutions, or do they talk about what the other side is doing? If it's an attack, an insult, or a justification, if it's something that looks like it's to hold for them to stay in power, or for them to get people to vote for them to keep them there, not because they're serving in a way that would benefit people, then, you know, that kind of tells you what their intention is, you know. So yeah.
It's perfect. You know, I would like to kind of distinguish something for you though. There's the language that you use training people in process, okay? Like a process inside of a company,
Mhm.
and a process where it may be new and different. So any of us that have been in, like for instance, the tech industry over the last 40 years, every
Mhm.
year is a brand new deal with all sorts of new things. When I first started using microcomputers back in 1983, I bought my first batch of Macintosh computers for a company that I was working for in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. And the neat part of that was now we had all of these computers on people's desks, and they could do things like word processing and spreadsheets and that sort of thing. And then they could print them to an attached printer. And then 2, 3 years later, I mean, things came in batches, you know, like upgrades. And throughout the 1980s and the 1990s, processing power preceded the ability for software coders to to write challenging software that really even came close to what you know the processing power was. So we would see 4, 5, 6 years. The XT computer, for example, had a 10-year lifespan with a 10 megabyte hard drive, right? People used XTs for 10 years. Why? Because it was very simple. And the software wasn't challenging the hardware to grow quickly. Well, in the 1990s, we started networking. And then we started with the connection to the internet, first with these things called modems, and dialing into America Online and starting to get into the whole social media thing. You remember? You've got mail. You know, when you dial in and connect to Online. So every year there was something new in terms of networking computers together, then networking computers together to share servers and services and printers and that sort of thing. Then networking computers together so that you could remotely manage all of that. Then came, you know, virtual machines, so that instead of having a room full of servers, you could have maybe 4 or 5 pieces of equipment that managed 50 or 60 different processes simultaneously with a lot less electricity, a lot more computing power. And all of that got so far out in front of the software that we had to invent social media and Twitter and Facebook. You know, we went through the, you know, MySpace, and all of that sort of thing along the way, which was post AOL. So now, where are we right now? What is the number one thing that people spend their time doing throughout the day? Well, if you have a one of these, they think it's a good idea to tell you from week to week what your actual contact time is. It's up 16%, it's down 4%, whatever that is. Is that really interesting to you? No, it's not. But they want you to think while they're addicting you to a lifestyle and a behavior that they're being responsible by giving you the the phone number for uh, social media anonymous. you know we're letting you know so that you'll be able to gradually see if you're getting worse or getting better, in terms of this is becoming the most important thing in your life. And now what's the next generation going to look like? It's not enough that we've got all the news tailored to giving us a narrative where we no longer can go and get the facts on a particular story. We're going to hear all the words that are used by people describing what they think happens so that they can get clicks and they can make big salaries. What's going to get even better than that, because Facebook has changed its name to Meta. And the main reason that they're doing that is that they're not satisfied with the experience that people have um, getting out of bed in the morning and immediately reading all of these posts by other people and all of the integrated apps like TikTok and Instagram and all. Everything is designed to keep you there and buying things and getting more information so they can sell your data. It's not good enough. Now we're going to have avatars again. We're going to have these goggles that we put on, and we wake up in the morning and we're already in the virtual world, and we can be in the same room as anybody else on the face of the planet, and this is going to be better. I don't think so, Tim. I think going outside and smelling flowers, taking your shoes off and walking barefoot through the grass, the freshly mowed grass, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves on the trees. Do you notice they're not asking us if we want that? They are training us to demand it.
It's so interesting. Yes, and I think about my grandparents weren't in the trees. They were in a factory. They were in an industrial, stinking, oil, nasty, working 12 hours a day. They weren't enjoying nature. They weren't, it was just, but they enjoyed nature long enough to commute from the house that they were trying desperately to pay off to the factory where they would desperately make the money they needed to keep paying off the house and the car that were getting them there. An endless loop. And then they retired and maybe enjoyed nature for a few years before they died. So, yeah, so again, was it really this rosy golden, so, and I guess, I get the meta, the metaverse and that whole thing. And what if it gives people the ability to have less time working and plugged in and more time with their families and out going on hikes and stuff? What if crime is reduced because rather than stealing money to accumulate stuff, they're getting little gadgets and widgets online, like all the little online game things that they have, and that satisfies that need. So now they're doing whatever they need to do virtually. And maybe some people, just like with everything, I mean, there are people that watch television 8 hours a day. There are people that never watch television. They all have equal access to it. They've just regulated themselves. And some people don't regulate themselves well. And I think that's human, and when it eventually there's some kind of cause and effect, and behaviors change over time. But you know I mean, it's been, studying business books for decades now, and one of the biggest things is how miserable meetings are and how much time is wasted in the office. At one point I think it was 50% of the day was wasted time. So maybe a virtual avatar that lets you plug in will just allow us to be more efficient and have more time to do higher level things, that our two generations back, they didn't have time for it. They didn't, you know. So I I don't know. So again, there's the hammer.
Well,
Which
yeah,
view of the hammer do you want? You know,
yeah. I mean, remember, there are no bad tools.
right? That's what I'm
No,
saying, and I think
tools don't
I
kill
think
people.
again,
People kill people, right?
yeah, and what makes me nervous is the they language, you know, because I mean, cancel culture, honestly, all it is capitalism, isn't it? Isn't it just, if I don't like something, I'll stop investing attention and resources in it, and then it will die. It will go away. You know, it's whether it's you know, pet rocks, or, you know, think about all the fads, you know, and Cabbage Patch dolls. One year, everybody's fighting, you know, and paying thousands of dollars to get them for Christmas, and 5 years later, they don't exist.
Beanie
Why?
Babies, yeah,
You
the
know?
whole whatever.
Yeah. So, you know, so I mean, a book disappears off the shelves, it's no longer published because people aren't interested anymore. They stop buying it, you know? So then the publisher says, you know what? No one's buying these things. I'm going to get rid of it. And, you know, and then if there's a reaction to it, I always view that like the kid when you clean out their room and you go to get rid of toys they haven't played with in 3 years, and all of a sudden they're like, but I want that still. Right? They got a reminder of it. So now, but they don't. They don't. They're just remembering something that used to bring them, that used to attract their attention, that no longer does. So there's, you know, but it can be hard. It can be hard to let go of things that we have an attachment to. And, you know, so you have an attachment to work meaning a certain thing, or money meaning a certain thing, or success meaning a certain thing. Those things are, we should encourage the evolution of those things, especially if it moves us all towards a state of, I don't know, at least functional coexistence. I don't think there'll ever be harmonious existence, because
You're such a
we're,
dreamer, my friend.
yeah,
I
yeah,
love
yeah,
that
you know,
about you.
yeah,
And if you could take a breath for 1 second, I'm going to tell
sure,
you,
sure, yeah,
if the world had your altruistic sense of what makes things work, we'd have no problems. You know what the biggest difference between cancel culture and how other people have just watched something quietly go out of existence back in the day? You know, when you went to church and somebody was sharing stories about someone who had said something publicly that was so abhorrent, once you heard about it, you didn't talk over, I'm not going to buy that orange juice anymore, or I'm not going to buy those cornflakes, you know, because Bruce Jenner is on the cover and of Wheaties, but now he's a woman, and well, I mean, how do we manage that? So the point is that we're cancel culture was like one of those aha moments when a very tiny group of people decided that they would try to activate other people that either A, already agreed with them, or B, didn't want the consequences of their nasty speech to, you know, to be focused on them in particular. So this was like 6 7 years ago, 10 years ago. When did you first hear cancel culture? It's a relatively new term, like 3 4 years.
yeah. I never heard it until recently, and when I heard it, I thought it was just an attempt to label something, you know, that's always existed. It just became more intentional, like, you know,
No,
people, and I think it caught attention for a while, and I think, personally, I think it'll just fade into the background.
it's a
It's not,
Twitter
you
phenomenon,
know,
okay? No
yeah,
Twitter, no cancel culture. This allows people to call for the destruction of a person's life's work in minutes and have it generated to hundreds of millions of people around the world. And it is so powerful that they actually used all the bot technologies for retweeting and all that sort of thing, so that everybody who saw this everywhere was like, yeah, of course we're gonna cancel, you know, we're gonna cancel this company, we're gonna cancel that company, until some people stood up, like you know, Goya, the the food company,
mhm,
and said, man, y'all are crazy. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not changing my policies. Give me your best shot. See if I'm still standing. That CEO, the rest of the CEOs that have no backbone have created this phenomenon, and it's been a self-fulfilling prophecy by allowing first their language to be changed, then their thought process to be changed, then their behavior to be changed, and now they are programmed to respond to anything on command, up to and including the drawings of Eminem's. Uh, uh, what the what?
See now that kind of stuff, I think, is a waste of time to be outraged about.
Oh,
Honestly, and I'll tell you why. It's kind of interesting to me, like, because I heard about that. The other one I just heard recently was Carhartt. They're all boycotting Carhartt because they continue to have a vaccine mandate. So, which I found humorous because all the news, companies they're listening to have the same thing. If they're using an AT&T service, they're the same thing. Every airline has it. So, but they picked one out to direct their outrage at. And I think
that's my
that's what
point.
happened. And you know
100%.
what? Carhartt, they're not going to change their mandate. They're like, fine, burn the clothes you already bought. What do we care?
Yeah,
And they're going to commit to quality and they'll be fine. If M&M wants to modify the way their cartoon M&Ms look because of their being aware of shifts in culture and their market, more power to them. I don't care what kind of shoes the M&Ms wear. So
right.
and it
Okay, but I'm telling you what, there was no point for them to do that until all this transformational change in the language, the thinking, the behaviors, and now the commands. Around the world, all corporations on all continents in every single country that matters, they're all trying to escape the watchful gaze of those people, them that might come after them like a Carhartt or like a pillow guy or
who's but who's them? There's got to be enough people on the planet that want to be more aware of gender not being as binary as or being more fluid, whatever. There's enough people that this company said, we're a business, we make money, we make profits, and our market is saying that they would like to see. It'd be like saying, wasn't there a point where there's some color M&M they didn't have, red or green, or I don't remember what it was, and then they added it because people wanted it, and
I
they're
think it
like,
was blue.
yeah, I don't remember. So so was that, was that bowing to the pressure of the this oppressive them,
Well,
or is it?
see,
Yeah,
that's an important thing that you're saying. Throughout history, companies changed their products as a result of marketing, uh, telling them what would make it more desirable and make it uh, more usable by more people. But
yeah,
that's not what's motivating folks today. And there's two sides to this and many different flavors of it. So I'm not basically I'm taking the opposite so we can have this conversation. But the
yeah.
point is there is nobody out there who can withstand an onslaught of 50 or 60,000 retweets in a couple of hours without doing something to it unless they're pretty darn sure of who they are. And the other part of it is the people who are inside the companies that are making these changes, they ain't like you and me sitting back waiting for people to make suggestions to them. They is the activists. They are inside the
Sure.
corporation and they are so idea that you've got that these corporations are in their ivory towers and are withstanding all of this change in the culture having to do with language leading to thought leading to behavior leading to commands. um, I just made that up, by the way. I don't even know if I've ever heard that anywhere. But my point is this: you get enough people who have been converted to a way of thinking and who are trained to respond automatically without putting any thought to it. They ain't like you and me, where we can sit back and we can go, man, I just don't see how that makes sense for people. I don't see how that's good for anybody. You know, if if we're going to take this small group of people over here who say they're feeling bad, and now we're going to make the whole rest of the world get that emotion by placating them and letting them have control over what we do with other people. That kind of sounds like, some bad guys in history, that doesn't sound like that's good for children and other living things in my book. That's not like kumbaya, live and let live, laissez-faire. This is like, no, we have ways. We have ways.
Yeah. I find it very interesting. I think that so much of what we're experiencing now is you've got a tidal shift in how people view themselves and what they want their world to look like, and everyone out there they're figuring out how to respond to that. So, and companies are going to do certain things, and depending on their values and their audience, that's going to lead them down certain pathways, and others are going to have different ones, and they're going to do different things. And I guess it just comes back to us. We each get to choose what we're going to feed our energy and attention. And and it's funny, I don't think I'm idealistic or altruistic. I think I'm just realistic with a little side dish of optimism that, you know, it, in the end, it's, it, there's an opportunity for us to be better than we've been, and to continue to evolve as a species. And that is not going to be linear. It's going to be, you know, all over the place, ups and
Always
downs.
has been, Ken. You're 100% right.
Yeah. So, so in the meantime, I'm just going to choose to be the person that I've chosen to be in the world, and, not feed anger and outrage, from either side or any perspective, and I'm going to do my best to try to be a balanced, graceful human in the world. And I'll model that. And I'll adjust my language on an ongoing basis to continue to model that to people that move in and out of my circle. And, and if they adopt it and that starts to spread, and it leads to ripple effects of people deciding they don't want to participate in certain things that they don't agree with anymore because they have a new perspective, so be it. And I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm saying that I'm not afraid of our ability as a species to figure this out and navigate it better and better over time. And some people aren't going to like it, and some people are going to be terrified of it, and others are going to be outrageous in the way that they handle it. And in the end, let's hope we figure it out. And if we don't know it, none of us will be around anyway. So the dinosaurs lasted a lot longer than we did.
I really don't know. I used to worship at St. Paul's Church back in the 80s and 90s with a man who was he was a German foot soldier. Actually, his hands were so arthritic, and he would tell me stories about what it was like in Germany, prior to the 1930s, because he was a very, very small boy, like maybe 8 or 9 years old, in the early 1930s. And what he was saying was, there was no point through his entire early years till he got to be 18, 19 years old that he ever thought that he would be a soldier in the German army. German army had no reason after after Kaiser Bill got beaten World War I, had no reason to have an army at all. In fact, the rest of Europe at that point weren't interested in them coming back and doing the same thing all over again, except for the people who were in power had made certain decisions about how they were going to conduct themselves going forward. Mm-hmm. And you got this perfect balance of people being dominated. If you remember, the whole rise of fascism was a response to really poor leadership by those countries that had, prior to that, had kings and queens, right? Mm-hmm. And all of those people, I mean, all of the royal thrones throughout Europe were all the same families. I mean, they intermarried over hundreds of years, and they all came from the same families. So the whole point with Ernie's story was none of this needed to happen except for fascism, which communism actually was in Russia. It was not communist at all. It was fascist, the same thing as Nazi Germany. The point of all of it was that um, the masses had no control over what decisions were being made by people who were taking action. And I appreciate that you're the kind of person that will pick and choose what language you're going to adopt and not adopt. I do the same thing. I will, however, not let somebody come in and tell me how I have to speak from now on. And I will fight to the death for your ability to choose what you're going to be
Oh, yeah.
saying as well. And that's really the big distinction here. While you have people at this point who are so distanced from needing to fight for anything, there's never been an assault on, Topeka, Kansas. For some strange reason, that makes all of the wars that have occurred over there, right? Wherever that is.
Mhm.
And what really woke us up was Pearl Harbor being bombed. Who would have thought in advance that that would ever happen?
Yeah.
So where we are right now is, I don't know. I've been kind of curious about this. I think it's an interesting phenomenon. And our choices, yours and mine, even with this podcast and the people who will be listening to it, our reach is not very far.
Mhm.
However, there are other people who have the bully pulpit. They have a tremendous reach, which is why it's so important for people to have millions of followers on Twitter. All of that said, these are just those things, as Arsenio Hall used to say, that make you say,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I will say, it's funny. I hear lots of, kind of conversation about Germany and, history repeating itself. And, I wonder how diverse was it back then? How multicultural was it? How effectively could they all communicate? I mean, it's like, I look at our country, and this is we are such a bunch of freaking angry independent children. How can you can't get anyone to agree on anything. You couldn't even get, if 50% of this country said that shirt is blue, the other half would immediately pronounce it green and call it a conspiracy theory, and before you know it, there'd be all kinds of pop-up businesses and pyramid schemes about, blue not green or whatever. Like, we can't agree on a freaking thing. So, so I guess that makes me very skeptical that there's a way to really control the masses, because all we want to do is disagree on everything.
I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I'm gonna say yes, and the only people that we hear are from the loud vocal extremes. The silent people in the middle, who are most everybody, get
Yeah.
woken up, and now they're starting to come back out, and they're like, what's going on around here? We're not happy with this. Well, yeah, we were happy to be quiet while everybody else is making noises, but polls do not represent the people that live in
No.
anywhere, way, shape, or form. There are so many people that have never responded to a poll in their entire life, and so many
Hmm.
people that are responding to almost every single poll that they're taking. How do you
Yeah.
generalize to millions of people the responses of somewhere between 200 and 1,000 people in the way that you ask the question? And the whole fun part of it is we don't know what people think until we ask. We
Well,
really
yeah,
don't.
yeah, and that is the reality of it. I mean, politically, the election cycles will tell us what people are thinking. That'll speak, and part of that's being influenced by systems that are in place. But obviously, those can change too. So
What if
so
then they
we shall see.
what if they are totally the product of the system that's in place?
Well, it's still okay, so it is. So, and then things are, I mean, look at certain states right now. They're doing some pretty interesting, policy changes and putting in certain rules and regulations. And I don't care whether you're looking at California or Florida, whether it's more right leaning or left leaning, they're going to do some things, and then that's going to have an impact on people's lives. And when it does, they're going to say something about it. And it's either going to go more in that direction or it's going to change. you know So, and there's definitely a lag, but I think the lag is less as awareness goes up and more people do get plugged in.
Yes.
But I agree with you. I mean, most of the people that I'm working with, the really cool contributors doing a lot of balanced things, they're kind of like me, very little social media, very little news, but they're plugged in. They're plugged in to doing things that matter, that can add value to the human experience in as balanced a way as possible. And still some people like it and some people don't. And I get mini canceled all the time. People don't agree with decisions I make, so they don't want to have anything to do with me. That's their privilege. And if they tell their friends don't have anything to do with him, okay, I can't really control that. you know and all I can hope is, if someone hears something that doesn't align with who I've chosen to be in the world, they'll maybe ask me, and then we can have a conversation about it. And if we don't, it's a big world and people flow in and out of it.
I completely agree. And every opportunity that you and I get, I'm going to speak for me right now because I'm still learning who you are after 7 or 8 years, you know? So, and I would never put words in your mouth, but I want people who have been around me to know that they are already loved before I meet them. And that is my way of being in the world. And I am always going to be a human being and misunderstand things from time to time. And I
Mhm.
always appreciate it, as you said, when somebody comes over and says, "Hey, I heard a little rumor," or "Is it true that you said?" And, it's kind of fun to just say, "Well, if it's true, what does that mean to you?
Mhm.
If it's not true, what does that mean to you?" You know?
Yeah.
Bringing the curiosity into the conversation to get to know people better and for them to get to know themselves better, as a result, and creating a new level of relationship. And I do have not much more to add to what you said. This is like we get to do this charge through life. It goes by quickly. I mean, I've got whiplash for what 68 years looks like, being alive. But and the whole idea is, if we get a chance to make the world a better place, as you said, if we get a chance to use our energies to create something new for people who didn't have it before, and to bring
Mhm.
love to a situation where maybe love wasn't present or not recognized or, not in the conversation, I don't think that's so terrible. What do you think?
I don't either. It's funny. Dan Sullivan, he's a strategic coach guy. He's got a consulting company, and he's a cool dude. He's almost 80 now. Plans to live to 150. He lives his life as if he's going to live that long. It's kind of a cool philosophy.
Yeah.
But he was talking with someone about, he'd gotten burned in some kind of business deal or whatever, and someone was like, "Look, shouldn't you be a little bit more cautious and guarded, because people suck. Their motives aren't, you don't know what their motives are." And his response was, he said, "Look, I have one of two choices in life. I can extend trust and then deal with the consequences of that, or I can not extend trust and put them through all these qualifiers and then see what happens on the other side of that." And he said, "I'm just going to extend trust." And he says, "Yeah, sometimes I got burned. He's had people steal from him. He's had people betray him, take his stuff, take his money, but in the end, he likes living his life where he chooses to extend trust first." And it resonated with me because I think, you're hearing it in our conversation today. I just believe in people. I believe in the possibility that they bring to the table. And although it doesn't always work out, and absolutely there are just evil, nasty people in the world, and there are people who will, you know, hurt and betray and all that stuff, I'm just focused on the light. There's light in there somewhere, and I don't know what led them there, and maybe it was genetics, maybe it was environment, maybe some combination of things, but I'm still just going to continue to believe in people and let that influence the way I move through the world, you know?
Completely agree. My philosophy since the 1970s has been every human being, no matter how misguided or how uh, unapproachable they seem to be, has gold. Okay,
Hmm.
always find the gold. or make a decision, the gold ain't worth finding in this particular instance, and move on. But give everybody,
Yeah.
the benefit of the doubt in advance. And to be able to be that person, you have to start with a high degree of trust with yourself. You got to be able to trust yourself to be able to deal with powerfully any outcome that can happen. Then you can listen to any sentence that can come out of people's mouths. You can hear them say words that you despise, and you cannot hold them accountable to your definition of those words.
Yeah. And, it is interesting too, because saying that there's the balance of it, like I would give so much and so much belief that it would exhaust and drain me, and you end up being resented for it. So, so there has to be the time. I learned the hard way. Sometimes you've got to fire them, whether it's in business or in life. It's just, you did your best, and they're just coming from a place where it's unhealthy for both of you, and you need to terminate the relationship, period. And that's rough, especially if you're a believer in people. That's a hard thing to do. But it's also healthy. And it doesn't mean that the relationship might not circle back at some future time. And if it doesn't, that's okay. Again, it's a big world. How many people do you have relationships with out of the 7.5 billion running around?
I'd say I have a relationship with all of them. I haven't met many of them yet.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, as far as, your more intimate, personal contact, I mean, absolutely the ripples spread. But it's just kind of interesting that, people will come in closer into that more inner circle or whatever it is. And then sometimes there will be resonance, and sometimes there won't be. And so you got to be willing to say, this isn't the right circumstance or situation for me. And so I'm going to change the parameters of it, or just end it. Sometimes you have to do that. It's okay.
Amen. And on that thought, just want to remind everybody, we have been noodling an idea again for quite a while here. It's been a really wonderful conversation, Ken. And I look forward to our next, and I look forward to all of you folks at home continuing to send us ideas and energy. And you're going to be hearing this in a different time than we're speaking it, but we're really drawing on all of your thinking and what you're sending us while we're talking right now. So you saw this podcast, you listened to it, and I hope that this brings you your best week ever. And that's it for today. Bye for now.
Bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.